Welcome, everyone, to the first session of the Association of Consultants for Liturgical Spaces webinar series for the fall. Today we have with us Sister Nancy Lee Smith, who will be speaking about icons. The title of her talk is To See and Be Seen with the Eyes of Love, the Language of Icons. So over to you, Gilbert.
Thank you. So it's my pleasure to introduce to you Nancy Lee Smith, a sister of the IHM order in Monroe, Michigan. I'm not going to go through her bibliography. Biography. You've got that information already when you signed up. But I'll say how we met was quite interesting. I was doing some masses at the Mother House in the middle of COVID, and after one of the masses, Nancy came up to me, and basically a kindred spirit. I had spoken a little bit about architecture, and because she's involved with design, art, and architecture, she was telling me a bit about what she was doing, and she invited me over to her studio, and 2.5 hours later, I finally emerged, and it was just an incredible experience of understanding icons. And at that point, I thought this would be quite fascinating for our members, and also for my students, and some of them I think will be joining. I'm grateful she accepted the invitation to present today. We're going to be using a slightly different format. We're using video as well as breaking that into 3 parts. So there'll be time for question and answers between each part. The first part is going to be the distinction of sacred art versus religious art, then the geometry of icons, and then finally the preparation of the boards. When we come back in December, we'll be talking more about the actual creating of the icons. I'd also like to acknowledge at this time a colleague of mine from the University of Detroit Mercy School of Architecture and Community Design, Enrique Ledesma of EEL Studio, whose interest is in filmmaking and architecture and the intersection of both. Along with one of his graduate TAs, we came over and spent 3 hours, this time videotaping Nancy. And because of the rich material that was there, we decided to make this a 2-part webinar. Now, again, the first part, a little bit more of how to read the icon, and then a little bit more of the writing of the icon. And that'll take place on December 13th. So without further ado, I will turn this over to Nancy. She's going to do a little bit of a preamble before we begin going into the video. And it has to do with the KGB.
My teacher was Ksenia Pokrovska from Moscow in the Boston area. She had immigrated. And a number of Russians are in that area. There's a lot of Russians in Boston, in that area. She was a member of Isograph, the Iconographer Society of Moscow, and she told me there were 4 reasons the KGB would arrest you in the middle of the night and bring you in for questioning. One was if you were suspected of trafficking in drugs. One was if you were suspected in trafficking with weapons. A third was if you were suspected in trafficking with young girls and sex. And the fourth was if you were suspected of being an iconographer. And she was brought in twice for questioning. And she said they'd ask you some basic questions and she would answer, and that would kind of get it settled, and then she'd come back and keep doing them. She was a physicist and research science at the University of Moscow for many years. In order to, her spiritual father was her pastor, and he suggested that she, in 1962, that she get out of doing the university work and get into doing icons. He said in 20 years there's going to be a demand in Russia. And 20 years later was the perestroika and Gorbachev, and she was an iconographer by then. So the other thing I want to parallel this with is the iconoclast period in Byzantium and that empire, how parallel the KGB and the Byzantine emperors were in their fear of the power in their icons.
And so with that, we will start the video.
Since I first realized it, my mission is to depict God as beauty and to fascinate others with God's beauty. God is not just love. God is not just truth. God is beauty. Amen. Good morning. My name is Sister Nancy Lee Smith, and I am here to share what this ministry is involving icons. So, an icon is not religious art, not at all. An icon is sacred art, and there's a huge genre difference. John of Damascus, or John Damascene is his name, settled the iconoclast dispute back when it was ripping through the Byzantine kingdom in the 8th century at the Second Ecumenical Council for the Roman Church. And I went to a scholarly conference at the University of Michigan one time, a whole weekend on that period. And it was very historical and so on. And they talked about the destruction of icons. St. John says, the icon participates in the merits of the saint that's depicted in the same way that their relics do. Hence the miracles that occur in the presence of icons. And also the place, whether it's a church or a home or an office, is sanctified by the presence of the icon. So we're not just talking about fly-by-night religious paintings that are objects that we observe. We're talking about a piece of art that is a window to another reality. And the icons participate in the mystery of grace and become communicators of that grace. And I'm going to develop that with you. And that's why we venerate an icon. We don't worship it, but we hold it in reverence. We venerate it. We give it veneration. So we call them windows or doorways to heaven. And they show the Gospels in line and color. They act as a visual Bible for people who don't have a Bible. And this was way back. The Gutenberg Bible wasn't produced until many centuries later. So people didn't have written Bibles. Icons gave people the opportunity to reflect on the gospel. So that's why they come from the gospel stories and from the Old Testament. Now here's a photograph I want you to look at. And it's a photograph taken from a deck in Fenton, Michigan, right after a hoarfrost blizzard. And hoarfrost comes in and drifts horizontally and makes horizontal icicles. So you see the buck and you see the cat. And I would ask you to think, what would happen if there was no glass in that door wall? What is the power of a window? And notice that the cat is seeing and being seen, as well as the buck. And then you have the fawn showing half the fawn's face. That gives you a concept of the power of a window. Think about your own favorite window. Thank you. Think about your own favorite window that you might have that you like to look out. And what do you see? What might you see? I know some children one time I spoke to had a bird's nest on the windowsill right outside the window. And so they got to watch all that activity very carefully. So the window offers you an opportunity that nothing else does. How do we see heaven? We don't, but we have these windows. So I'll get into that and I'll explain that as we proceed. A key symbol that's involved in all icons, and not just religious paintings, but all icons, is called inverse perspective. Now, when you look at a sunset on water and you see the sun right at the horizon, you have the glare of the sun very, very small, and everything is wide as it comes close to you. So the vanishing point, it's called vanishing point perspective or linear perspective, is what we're used to as Americans and 20th century people. The Byzantines had a different perspective on it, and that was inverse perspective. Everything in the icon is expanding and coming to a vanishing point out in front. And I don't think there's a single icon that shows that more dramatically than this particular one. This is a small print of a 4.5-foot icon that hangs in St. Benedict's Church over a side altar. This, if you see this is by Andrei Rublev, and I copied it. When I was at the Liturgical Gallery in Moscow, the icon was this wide, that wide, and down to my knees. And you were right in front of it. It was a rectangle. I put it in a circle because everything about it, the shapes of the wings, shapes of everything in it seemed circular to me. So I changed it without changing the icon itself. And this figure represents the Father, who points to the Son, and the Son who points to the Spirit, and the Spirit whose hand hovers over the blank white table that's not just an ordinary table, but it represents creation. And the Father figure is in the divinity color of rose, and the Spirit is in the creation and nature color of green. And these are called double reflection because you use opposite colors to show the highlights and the lowlights. When you do an ordinary pencil drawing or when you do an ordinary painting, dark is always the shadow and the lights are always the lights. But you start by putting in the shadows. That's the first thing you do. This is the opposite. You do this, you don't fill in the shadows, you just fill in the lights. Now, the sun is opaque and solid and incarnational with solid blue and solid red. The blue is lapis lazuli from Lake Baikal in Siberia. And my Russian teacher was a physicist and research science at the University of Moscow before she ever got into doing this back in the 50s and 60s. She worked with Zenon, the most famous iconographer in the world, who's a monk in Russia, and these other iconographers that belong to a group called Isograph, the Iconographer Society of Moscow. And she organized a team of geologists, and they went all over the former USSR and Kazakhstan and all those other small countries and garnered these examples of stones and these hunks of minerals and things, and pulverized them, mortar pestled them, and took out this hunk of lapis that I had. I sent it to Germany to have it done because it took too much handwork to do that by myself. But you take out the feldspar and the mica so you get the pure blue. And this blue was a light blue from Lake Baikal in Siberia. And that's what was used. And the blue always represents divinity in icons. So Jesus is cloaked in humanity and robed in humanity and cloaked in divinity. Now the cloth, C-L-A-V in Russian, means stole in English, the stole. And so you know that that's the Christ. Now, if you stand in front of that icon, do you see the cup? You might want to zero in on the cup. The cup has the sacrificial ram's head in it, and it's always been a surrogate symbol for Christ because of Abraham and his son and the ram's horns who were caught in the shrub that became the surrogate for his son Isaac to be saved. What I want you to notice is the real cup is not that cup. Here's the cup. Here's the rim up here, and here's the base. And that cup has an empty space at the table, and the whole icon comes out to the vanishing point of the heart of the person standing in front of it. You are the fourth person at the table, and you're invited by Jesus, who says, you're my eyes, and you're my feet, and you're my hands, and you take me to your world, and you bring your world to me. That's the power of an icon. You see that in all the icons, but it's so powerful in this one. This little shelf right here says it's not just a table, but it's an altar, and that's the shelf where you put the relics. Now, when Xenia taught me that, that was not in any of the books, but it is now. More recent books come out, and it is in there now. And these platforms mean they are in sacred space. And you'll notice when you see a nativity, Mary's feet are always on a platform. She's in a special category of her own. And I went to Knock, Ireland, and I saw the beautiful apparition there where she had come on the outdoor gable of the church and appeared to the people of Ireland during the potato famine. And there's Joseph standing next to her like that, a little lower. She's standing there on a platform. And then John the Evangelist is on the other side in a swirl, holding the scripture. And then over on the altar are 6 cherubim. It's a powerful example of the same principle. Now, when we get over to the gallery later on, I'll show you all the things about this that are similar to all other icons that make them icons, not just religious paintings. And they are looking out at you. The staff means they're messengers, and the angels' wings mean they have traveled to be there. And the tree is the tree of Mamre, representing the cross, and it's over Christ. And the buildings represent the family tree or the house of God, that's where they come from. And that's the main thing. And what I want to say to you is what happens when you're painting an icon like that. I was painting on it on that table over there, and it was this big around, and I'm bending over it. And I had told my friend I was going to come over and do the halos. It's like a dance, do the halos, you know. So I had my compass, and you take a nib on your compass. It's like this, and you load it up with the paint with your brush. So I had it set, and I set it in the middle, and I made a circle. And as I began to draw the compass with the red paint in it around the Father's halo, I no more than touched it when I felt this vortex of love, a current of energy and love whipped through my arm, whipped through my body, from the Father to the Son. I will never forget that experience. I was just an iconographer doing my job. And then I went to finish later on the Son. And I loaded it up again, and I started to move around. And I felt this avalanche like Niagara Falls of love coming all over me. I wasn't wet, but I was totally washed over with love. And for about 10 years, I said, this was about 23 years ago. For about 10 years, I said, well, I experienced the Father and the Son. Where was the Spirit? And one day, real clear, Nancy, that was the Spirit. It goes from the Father, through the Son, to the Spirit. And it comes out on us. That's the Spirit's job, is to bring that intense love between those two. Right here in our hearts.
You drop this.
That's sacred art. It's very different than a painting that you're the observer and the judge of, and that's your object you perceive. You're being seen. You're being perceived. That's sacred art. It participates in the mystery. And I could tell you icon after icon after icon where that happens. And sometimes icons chase you your whole life long. And I intend to share that story with you. I want you to notice how drooped and long the shoulders are. That's not how people look. There's no shoulders sticking out, right? And when you look at an icon of Peter, and we'll do that at the gallery, and he's turned 3/4 to the side, he looks like the humpback of Notre Dame. There's a big hump on his shoulder. So what you're seeing, when you look at an icon, what you're observing is the front, the side, and the back brought forward. You're seeing the whole, your eye is wrapping around the whole person. That's why they're designed funny. So you see his back, his side, and his front. That's why they look like that. There's a lot of modern day icons that are not good icons. And I'll give you the criteria eventually, and you'll be able to judge them yourself. But that's a very important feature.
So we're opening it back up again for any questions, or if Nancy, if you had any additional insights that you wanted. I know there's another part that'll be dealing with the proportions. So I guess if anybody has any questions, we're going to open them up. We do apologize. We have to keep the microphones on. Unfortunately, they're not sophisticated enough to shut off and on. They're just on all the time. So if you're hearing some background noise.
I guess I have a question. Was there anything about icons as sacred art that was a surprise to you?
And if you want to turn on your microphones, since everyone's muted. George?
Me?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I saw your microphone go off. Or Linda?
Sure. I wouldn't say a surprise, but I loved hearing you talk about the spiritual experiences when you're painting or when you're creating your icons. And I have that when I paint as well. So it was just beautiful hearing you talk about that.
I agree with that. All iconographers can tell you stories like that.
Okay, well, we'll go ahead and then go into the second part. And this is going to be talking about the proportions that you find in icons.
I want to show you the geometry of all icons using this icon because it's crystal clear. Okay? The most important measurement on any icon is from here to here, the measurement of the nose. And you measure, you put your compass here and you make a circle, and that encloses her eyes and the baby's head. That's the exact size. Then you make another, you measure that circle the diameter, and you make another circle, and because it's a 3/4 turn, you move back 1 nose length. And so you make another circle, and that's her head and the baby's halo. And then the third time you do it, it's her halo, which is right up here. I saw the original on the Via Marilana over in Rome, and it's a place run by the Redemptorists. That's where it is. In the 9th century, I think it was Pius IX who gave the icon, which came from Crete, 12th century Crete. He gave the icon to the Redemptorists and asked them to preserve it and use it for devotions, and it's become world famous. So then you measure 12 nose lengths across, and you divide the 6th, 3rd, and 9th, and then you use a large compass, and I have one this big, and you go from here to here and throw the arc. Then you go from here to here and throw that arc. Then you go back and you measure the root 2 rectangle where the first one was thrown, and you throw the next arc, and you set up the whole icon. And it's all based on the measurement of her nose. Notice how Mary's elbow, this is the Hadegitria Eleusa, the Virgin who points the way. That's what it means in English. And her elbow comes to the 15th nose length and comes and points up directly to Christ. Everything is total geometry in this. So is every icon. So is every icon. And it's not that hard. It's simple. So that's basically most of it. And then I'll go into some of the details, the cap and the stars. Oh, the 3 stars. Usually there's one here, and behind here, and there. And the 3 stars represent before, during, and after the birth she remained virgin. That's what that means. So, and these are the instruments of the Passion. And this is Michael, Archangel Michael, and Archangel, that's the G, that's Gabriel, with the instruments of the Passion.
So again, we just bring it open for questions. I know a number of you are artists and have different ways of compositionally working with paintings and the like, but I'm kind of curious to see, was that something that resonated with different artists, how they set up imagery?
I've got, well, I'm happy to speak to that, because it's just this whole way of approaching writing an icon is very, very different from the way, I don't know, Western religious, what Sister Nancy is calling religious art. And that's very useful. That's a useful way of describing those two. Thank you. It's just a very different way that we approach, that I, for instance, as someone who also paints besides sculpting, approach an image, and I'm free to change things, to change traditional formula, and the icon tradition, it seems to me, is just very, very different. And it's I think to call it sacred art instead of religious art is very apt. But I did have a couple of questions, and the first one is, how do you decide which icon that you're going to write? Or maybe the icon chooses you, I don't know. And also, I understand that the Russians have a school of icon writing, the Romanians, the Greeks, and could you talk a little bit about that, if that's something you're familiar with?
Yes, thank you. First of all, there's 4 Russian schools. I used to know them all by heart. Pskov is one, Pskov, that's one. The Moscow school, that's what Ksenia was part of. I can't remember the other two names, but there's 4 major schools in Russia. Modern day Russian icons are a spin-off of the classic 3rd century Byzantine icons. When the 3rd century Byzantine icons started, there were other schools that were going on, one in Egypt and one in Ethiopia, and a third one in Greece. Those are the 4 oldest, the Byzantine, the Greek, Ethiopian, and Egyptian. And the Egyptian and the Ethiopians have extra large eyes. They have huge eyes on their icons because the eyes are the windows of the soul, and when you do an icon correctly, you never close off the corner of the eyes. They're left wide open. So they exaggerate that even more, and you see it in their stone carvings as well as in the icons that they write. The Greeks I was first trained in the Greek style before I met Ksenia, and the Greek style uses crosshatch lines. So from the nape of the neck to the top of the hair, where the hair starts, the top of the forehead, what you have are 5,000 crosshatch lines, and you just keep doing lines until you get all the shading and the highlighting and everything done. And the shading is already put in with the background color called sankir. Now, among the Russian school and the Byzantine school are some additional Eastern European schools. For example, the Ukrainians have a much lighter skin tone. The Russians is much darker. When I take a yellow type of pigment, an earthen soil, and I add a certain green to it, then I put a dot of red in it, and as you know from the color wheel, when you put a dot of the opposite color in, it makes that color darker. So that's how I get that olive look in the Russian style. The Ukrainians have a much blonder looking skin tone. That's just their tradition, and you see it in their churches and in their worship. I like the Greek style, but I really prefer the Russian, where you put the color on and spread the color with your brush to the limits, to the edges. There is one Russian teacher, his name is Vladislav Andreev from St. Petersburg, Russia, who has been working out of northern New York, and I've taken several classes of his. There's, excuse me. Little rescue. He has developed his own style, but the seminary at Vladimir Seminary, the Russian seminary, rejected the theology of his style. His is much more decorative, and when he spreads the color, he puts the puddle on and spreads it from the skin and never lets the brush touch the board. So you get a mottled, settled look. It's a whole different, like a marble effect. He likes the decoration. Well, the Tsars brought in the whole thing about decoration with the Russian style when they had these repousses on top with hammered gold and so on. And if you notice, the example I have of the Mother of Perpetual Help that's in the film, the outline of her halo is stippled and decorated, and they got into decoration. The point of it is the theology, the spiritual encounter. The point is not decoration. That's why that pure form needs to be preserved. Now, does that address what you were asking?
Yes, thank you. And my other question was, how do you decide which icon you're going to work
That's right.
with?
I'm glad you said that. Well, when I started my studio 29 years ago, after running a parish that had no priest in Virginia, I was told by the CFO of the congregation, the chief financial officer, that I had to start it as a business. So I had to pay all the bills out of what I paint, out of what I work, what I do. And if you take any courses on being a professional artist, they say count on 60% of your time being running the business and 40% producing the work. And then there's that famous phrase, starving artist. So it's kind of hard to pay the bills like during a pandemic. Sometimes people would, when I get a commission, I ask for 1/3 up front so I can get the materials and start working, and then they pay the balance when when the piece is finished. Because I used to run a parish that had no priest, I went back to visit my parishioner friends down in Virginia with my first 2 icons from a teacher in Pennsylvania who was not nearly as good as Ksenia. And I came back with 12 commissions. So I sort of had a jump start. So because of the professionalism, having to pay the bills, the phone bills, the heat bills, the everything, it was not in my bailiwick to choose which icon I wanted to do. However, when I would take a class, I could choose sometimes which one I wanted to do. I still have icons I want to do that I haven't even had a chance to do because I've been doing commissions, and I'm working on my last one now, which is 3 icons for a Trappist Abbey in Peosta, Iowa, and you saw examples of it, the Annunciation, Visitation, and Nativity. Once those are done, I can do some that I want to do, but I got to still pay the bills. So you got to still sell things. So it's a dance being a professional artist, and I think many of you who are professionals know exactly what I'm talking about. Does that answer your question? So sometimes you can choose, or sometimes you choose and you have to wait.
I guess another question is, what would you choose which icon would you choose if you, out of your own heart?
Okay, I sold all the ones I wanted to keep, so I've sold them. But I would like to do St. Anne holding Mary, because I had an encounter with the Blessed Virgin when I did that one. I would like to do the Holy Trinity on that round board that I was sanding, that I got ready, and it's as smooth as glass. I would like to do another Holy Trinity on that and keep that one. And the third one I want to do is Saint Hezekiah, Angel of the Countenance of God, where the angel from the Syriac tradition, and I found the tradition where that angel, it says from St. John of Dalyatha in Syria, who was one of the Hezekiahs. If you study Greek, the word for silence is Hezekiah. So the Hezekiahs were like the desert fathers in the south. They went out into the forest and kept silence and prayed. And John of Dalyatha says that the angels, you would think when you're in the presence of the Holy of Holies with the cherubim and the seraphim, or who are before the face of God, you would think that you would hear a cacophony of hallelujahs and praise and holy, holy, holy. He said, on the contrary, it's utter, complete silence, that the angels pulse their love to God, and God pulses his love back. It's a silence. So you can just pray by doing that motion and touch your heart without saying a thing or thinking a thought. They're there. And they're in the person next to you, and the person that's nice to you, and the person that it's hard to forgive. They're there.
So with that, I'm going to do the last segment, and then we'll open it up again for questions.
You ask good questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Peggy.
The boards are prepared by having rabbit skin glue, which is particles like Renox gelatin, only much, much stronger. And the people of the Mesopotamian Valley, as well as the Native Americans, all used rabbit skin glue. They were smart. So the skin of a rabbit produces this powerful glue. And that is poured over cold water, because what happens when you're going to make Jell-O and you put it in hot water? It beads up and it never dissolves. So you have to dissolve it in cold water, and then you turn on the heat and slowly bring it up. And it's a certain percentage of glue versus water. You put it in, and then you put a coat on top of your icon board. These are called splines. These are mahogany boards. I have great big ones in there, but this is easier to pick up. So these are splines because you're putting all the moisture on one side, and these counter push the grain so that it stays flat. So when you're preparing the board, you put the glue on while it's warm, and you give it a good coat. Then you make another mixture that's stronger, and you take a piece of limp cheesecloth and you cut it so that it's wider all the way around than the board. And you put that in, and you have to fold it in half, and then fold it in half, and fold it in half. There's a certain way to fold it. See how stiff that is? I had a piece of that was this long. And when I held it up, it didn't bend at all. It was that stiff. And that's put in, and you have to put it into the cracks. One little tiny air bubble spot will make the gold leaf jump off the wall 6 months after you finish the icon. You have to really put these on right. So that puts that on. Then you make a mixture of chemist chalk from Champagne, France, two scoops of that per 1 scoop of marble dust. And I go to a place that makes Formica countertops to get my marble dust, because they use marble. And you mix that together with the rabbit skin glue, and we put a pot here that's this big, and we mix a whole pot, and you sprinkle a little, and it has to eat it, and then you sprinkle some more, and it has to eat it, and you stir it very slowly so you don't get air bubbles. That's what you then pour into a container that you put into the refrigerator, some Tupperware container. And the next day you bring this heavy thing out because it's got marble dust. It's turned into gesso. And you set it down, and then you demold it like you would a Jell-O or something. And then you spray formaldehyde all over paper toweling, which is NyQuil throat spray. Did you know that's formaldehyde? And you make it all green, and you wrap that, because this is all organic and it has to be refrigerated or it develops mold and you can't use it. So you do that, and then you wrap it up. And then when you're ready to use it and start applying it with a spackling knife all over the whole thing, you take a slice off and put it on top of your board and cover it and leave it for about an hour and a half till it's room temperature. Then it's spreadable. Otherwise, it's like real firm Swiss cheese. Now here's a board that was all done. And notice how we protect the edges so the stuff doesn't get there. This was made by a carpenter here in town. And I'm going to do a small version of that icon on here. That's what I want to do. Once you sell your icons, you want them back. And so I love this image. I have Rubeloff's that's about this tall and that big, a print of his in my bedroom where I have this little altar where I pray. And it's a nice image, but it's not a real icon. This will be a real icon. And then you sand it, and that's my sanding booth. I put a ladder up here, and I climbed up there, and I mollied the cross beams to the ceiling so that way up on the ceiling was quite an experience. I was real young then. And then you lower that down with a pulley, and it comes right over here. And I have a power vac with a big exhaust thing that goes underneath it. And my nephew was just ordained a priest, and he came to visit me. And I said, how would you like to learn how to sand a icon board? So he's got a mask on and goggles, and he's all covered with a medic thing you put on when you're going into surgery. And he's working on it, and he sticks his head out and he says, Aunt Nancy, this is hard work. I said, you got it. So this has been sanded. This is ready to apply, and it's mirror finished. It has 9 coats of gesso on it, 1 a day. You never rush anything. If you rush it, it bubbles off and falls off, and it's worthless. Since I first realized it,
And so we open it back up for any questions or thoughts. And again, Nancy, if there was anything you wanted to add to that. Again, this was just to give you a little taste of the making process of icons. That'll be the December workshop. We'll go into more detail with how the pigments and the like are developed and created.
what you saw there was a very small little icon, very small, and even one a tiny bit bigger. I've done icons that are 12 by 7 feet and 12 by 8.5 feet, done in 3 panels, and the central panel 7 feet by 5. So getting that gesso on, getting that cheesecloth on, doing all of that is quite a job when you do it that way.
Yes, Marilyn.
Well, I have a simple question. How long does it take you to do one icon?
It depends on the icon. When I do just from the throat up to the head and one of those, if I clocked the time, I would think it would take probably about a month or 2, depending on if I did the board from scratch. When you go to an icon workshop and learn how to write an icon, they start with boards that somebody else made for you. They buy them ahead of time, and then you pay for them, and they spray the paint on, the gesso on, a lot of shortcut versions. They use the right materials. Sometimes when you get those, you have to mail them back and tell them your stuff didn't stick, it didn't stay, and they have to redo it. So it depends on if you have to do the whole process. If you start with just the board and you're doing just the writing, that itself would take, just for a small icon like that, with almost a life-size shape of the size of the head, that icon would take about 3 weeks to 5 weeks. Depends on the clothing. Now, the ones I'm doing now with the little tiny 1-inch faces, that's labor intensive. Those take months and months. They take a lot longer.
Can I ask one more question? Usually you see letters on the icon. What is it written in, or what do the letters mean?
Good. When you look at the icon of here, the one of the Mother of Perpetual Help, right up here, I don't think you can see it, but it says MP with a little S shape laying on its side, and then over there, theta, the theta letter in Greek with the line in the middle, and the Y. It's the first word is mater, and the line above it tells you that it's an acronym. So if your name is Karen, it would be KN with a line above it representing Karen. So this is Mater Theou, Mother of God. And the one for Christ is ICXC, and that's in Greek, Jesus Christus, and that's an acronym for Jesus Christ. And then in the halo, it's not on this one, but it is in most other halos of Christ. The 3 Greek letters, ha, omicron, meaning I am who am. I am the one who is, the burning bush message. God said that to Moses. I have a dear friend who's a Trappist monk who was an abbot for years, and he told me one day, because I didn't have the accent mark over the ha, that it was just an awe. So it didn't mean the one who is, it only meant the one who is. So he said you need the line over the accent mark above the ha. And so I've always put it on since.
Thank you.
Now, sometimes in other languages, people, when I do an English speaking icon for a Mother House of Nuns, I'll put their name in English.
So something, I'll just offer a little maybe insight. Rudolf Schwarz was a church architect in Germany, working with Romano Guardini and looking at what became the changes of Vatican II. And he writes beautifully about this shift to the modern mind that moves from that perspectival view that you see traditionally in paintings, which is trying to just capture what one sees, versus the iconographic kind of imageries that were developed in the early church, which puts you in the place of the scene, as you were describing.
Being seen. Yeah.
Being seen, which I think is really kind of unique. And I think, thinking now we're in the, 60-year mark of Vatican II, how we might begin asking some of those questions. Do we need to go back to an iconic imagination, or try to share the two? And it'll be interesting to see what people are searching for, because icons seem to become very popular now, but they're very westernized, and they're not necessarily following this kind of more controlled manner of understanding. Other questions, other insights?
Yeah, I have a question. Sister Nancy, I appreciate your presentation today. I was struck by your comments earlier about the role of silence in encountering the divine. And maybe you would just say a few more words about the relationship between sacred art and silence, and sort of the lack of silence in our culture, and the value of spending time in silence with sacred art.
Thank you. You know who just made a very recent wonderful statement about that? Pope Francis. I noticed yesterday when I was looking at the Vatican News, he gave a sharing when he talked about the speed up of our culture and the speed up of the distractions, and the difference between that and pulling back and setting aside and keeping sacred that time before the Lord, that time before God, that time to let God talk inside. The value of what I would call an 8-day directed retreat once a year. Not a busy retreat, but a quiet one. And let God speak to, the last time I went on a retreat, God drug up this memory from way back and kissed it and healed it. And it was like somebody pulled an abscessed tooth out that you didn't even know was there, So the value of silence and this value of allowing God to speak. He can't speak through all that noise. But one of the things I'm going to do when we get together the next time is talk about how an icon can follow you your whole life long, and how they keep finding creative ways to speak to you. It's just amazing how that happens. Especially if any of you work with young adults, there's wonderful ways God finds to speak to them. It's just beautiful. And the other thing is, in doing an icon, you don't sit down and just start drawing a face and make sure you make the nose in right relation to the size of everything. It's more about asking for the vision. Write down the vision, Habakkuk says. Write down what they show you. You beg and you ask and you fast and you pray. And when you don't, nothing comes. But when you do, they finally show you. And sometimes it's very dramatic and sometimes it's just very subtle. But there's a visual image and you know which way to go. I'll just give a quick example. I spent about a year asking St. Alphonsus to show me how to do hymn for the congregation, and it's on the wall here behind me. And I kept asking him, and I was working on different ways of researching and so on. I often traveled to where the person lived, and in fact I did do that with him. But I was walking into a church, my home parish in Kirkwood, Missouri, which was a Redemptorist parish, and the opening song was just coming to a close. It was the last verse. I had driven the van and the sisters got out and they went in. And this very hilly parking lot is where I had to go down and park, climb up the hill, and I got in church just as the last line of the song was going on. And like thunder, I heard this voice in my heart say, "Before you knew me, I knew you." And I knew it was Alphonsus. Makes me cry. And the rest of it I understood, and the rest of it was intuited. And I am the one who asked the Blessed Mother for you. Because I got my vocation in front of an icon when I was a young college woman. And it was not the order that I had been taught with. I didn't even know them, but it was clear as a bell. He was the one there pulling on her sleeve at that time. And here it is, 50 years later, and I'm walking in and I hear his voice say that. So sometimes they talk to you in your head, in your thoughts, in words. Sometimes it's through something somebody hands you and it's the right picture. I'll tell you more stories like that next time. The only thing I want to end with is this. Because we have all these intellectuals in my congregation, I knew that they would walk right by this diorama that says the making of an icon with all these pictures. So underneath I put this byline, and I'm going to share what it means with you in December. The making of an icon. For your information, FYI, 100 proof vodka, white wine, and beer are part of the process.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you for sharing us the wisdom that you've been bestowed upon in this great work that you do for the church. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.